If you don't have any wines from Priorat, Spain in your collection, you should definitely change that. There's some absolutely stunning wines being made, and it's a very special region. I recently visited Priorat and met with a number of top producers. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing my insights about Priorat. To fully appreciate Priorat, it's first necessary to understand a bit of history. Back in the late 1800s, France was being ravaged by phylloxera. There were very few vineyards that were surviving phylloxera, and so France had a huge shortfall in grapes. So among other things, they looked to Priorat to provide some of the fruit for the wines that they needed. As a result, Priorat was a thriving wine region with more than 42,000 hectares of vineyards, and everything was going extremely well for Priorat. However, within about 20 years, phylloxera hit Priorat and devastated the region. The phylloxera devastation in Priorat was severe. Many people fled the region, and most of the vineyards were simply abandoned. All that was being produced for almost 100 years in Priorat was modest amounts of bulk wine. In the 1970s, however, a group of visionaries, led by René Barbier Sr., began planting new vines and reinvigorating old vineyards. In 1989, this culminated in the production of a commercial wine. They did not have enough fruit to produce their own individual wines, and so what they did is these 5 or 6 families came together and they produced one wine collectively, but then they bottled it separately under their own label. Astonishingly enough, within 10 years, wines from Priorat were again highly acclaimed. Shortly thereafter, Priorat became only the second wine region in Spain to receive DOC A status, which is referred to as DOQ in Catalan, the other region being Rioja. However, even today, Priorat DOQ has only about 2,000 hectares planted under vine. When you drive through the region, you can still see evidence of many vineyards that were long ago abandoned. Priorat is only about 90 minutes to 2 hours from Barcelona. It's fairly close to the coast. However, there's mountains that shield Priorat from some of the coastal winds and rain. For that reason, it's extremely warm. It's a bit of an amphitheater, so it gets extremely favorable sun exposure and very, very little rain. The terrain is extraordinarily rugged. Although Priorat is extremely warm, there is wide diurnal range, which means that there's a big difference between the daytime and the nighttime temperatures. Evenings get very, very cool. That's especially true in some of the more elevated areas. Vineyards are planted on steep slopes called costers. Priorat is famous for its licorea soils. What is licorea? Well, it's a type of slate, oftentimes blue slate. It's very, very hot and dry and infertile. The lack of water and nutrients results in extremely low yields for the grapevines. For example, at Val Lloc, they have a Mas de la Rosa vineyard, and I was told that it takes the fruit from 7 vines to produce just one single bottle of wine. In addition, many producers farm organically and or biodynamically, if not entirely, then at least to the extent that they can. This further reduces yields. What kind of grapes are used to make wine in Priorat? Well, when you're talking about reds, you have to start with Grenache and Carignan. These 2 grapes handle the heat in the rugged climate of Priorat extremely well. To some extent, it's analogous to the southern Rhone region of France, except in Priorat, there's greater elevation and also a wider diurnal range. And so these grapes tend to get more acidity in Priorat than they would in the southern Rhone region of France. You also need to talk about Cabernet and Merlot when you're talking about Priorat. However, many of the Cabernet, Sauvignon, and Merlot grapes are being phased out by producers. The Cabernet and the Merlot vines were planted back in the late 1980s and 1990s, and it was actually the wine made from these grapes that helped to catch the attention of critics such as Robert Parker, which helped them to gain immediate commercial success because Bordeaux varieties were extremely popular at the time. And so while producers are extremely grateful for the contribution that those grapes provided, they're not quite as well suited to the terrain as indigenous varieties such as Carignan and Grenache. And so for that reason, they are being phased out a bit. Red wine certainly dominates production in Priorat. However, there is about 6 to 7% of white wine being made. That number is going up, however, as white wine is trending and becoming extremely popular in Priorat. So you can expect more white wines to be produced from Priorat in the future. Those wines are produced largely from either Grenache Blanc or Macabeu, or blends of the 2. Macabeu is known as Vieira in Rioja, and it's Macabeo in other areas. I also tried an excellent Viognier from Val Lloc, and there are some Rhone varietals such as Roussanne and Marsanne that are being planted as well. So if you get a chance to try one of those, definitely give them a shot. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. What are the wines from Priorat like? Well, I know many people are scared off by the high alcohol percentages in the wines. It's not uncommon for some of the Grenache-based wines to reach 16% or a little bit higher. However, these wines are often very, very well balanced, largely due to the acidity that's present. They also tend to have some intriguing minerality to the wines. I know that some people think this is nonsense, but to those people, definitely try a wine like a Chablis and tell me that you don't get sort of a chalky or rocky descriptor in that wine. Priorat is the same, and due to the Licorea soils, there's often an intriguing minerality in these wines as well. Similarly, with the Grenache-based wines, they often contain at least some percentage of Carignan, which helps to add some acidity and balance to those wines as well. Why are the prices so high in Priorat? Well, I know everyone likes to compare Priorat wines to Spanish wines such as Rioja and say that they're extremely expensive, and for that reason they will just get Rioja instead. I'm certainly a fan of Rioja as well, but I think a better comparable for Priorat would be the Southern Rhone, rather than Rioja. In Rioja, for example, the growing conditions are far more favorable and Tempranillo produces very large crops. So for that reason, you can get far higher yields in Rioja than you can in Priorat. As mentioned, due to the extremely inhospitable soils, in Priorat you get very, very low production and very low yields, and it's extremely hard to produce fruit. Just by way of an example, I'll again point to Valillac's Mas de la Rosa. This is a wine that's produced from vines that are 110 years old. It takes an incredible 7 vines to produce just 1 bottle of wine, and only 1,600 bottles are produced, even in a good vintage. You can compare this to a wine from Bordeaux. A Bordeaux producer might be producing tens of thousands of cases, and yet that wine may sell for $600 or more. That's true, even though those wines from Bordeaux may average only 30 to 50 years of age, compared to 110 or more in Priorat. And so in Priorat, you can definitely sometimes get something that's extremely special, especially from these historic centenary vineyards. Priorat also recently came out with a classification system that's more analogous to Burgundy than Bordeaux. With respect to the classification in Priorat, there are 4 different categories of wines. The first category, or the lowest level of classification in Priorat, is V de Via. To be called a V de Via wine, the grapes for the wine have to come from one of 12 subregions in Priorat. If they do, the producer can use the phrase V de Via on the label. An example would be the Vallillac Pereira wine. These are early drinking wines that are available at lower price points than some of the more highly regarded wines. They're often from younger vines that were planted within the last 10 to 20 years. The second category is V de Paracha. These are areas that are known for their terrain, geography, and climate. It's similar to a Ludi in France. The third classification in Priorat is Viña Classificata. This is a wine from a single vineyard of particular merit within a Parache. It's analogous to a Premier Cru. The fourth and most prestigious category in Priorat is Grand Viña Classificata. These are wines that are produced from a single vineyard of exceptional quality located within a Paracha. This category is analogous to Grand Cru. There's only a few of them currently, so it's extremely difficult to achieve this classification.